Okay, so now we're kind of thinking what can and can't be done about income inequality. And I don't want to be a negative Nelly. This is more opinion, and I think you have the right to disagree with me on some of this. So feel free to do it in the discussion. So what we've seen is income inequality has risen. We have a whole bunch of reasons for it, but what can we do about it? So one is higher minimum wages. We saw the minimum wage seems to decrease income inequality. Excuse me, higher minimum wage seems to decrease income inequality. Can we raise the minimum wage? Can we increase unionization rates? Can we increase transfers? What about tax, income, and wealth and corporate governance? So this is the promised paper on minimum wage, alternative paper on minimum wages. What they look at is a strong increase in the real minimum wage in Brazil from whatever 250 reals to in real terms to 600. So it was a tripling, or not quite a tripling, but a tripling in the minimum wage, and a commensurate dramatic drop, whatever 25% drop in the variance of log earnings, which is quite significant decrease in income inequality. So that's just mirroring what Card and DiNardo found in the United States for the minimum wage. So I guess I'm going to give you my brief overview. My read is that the minimum wage has only moderately destructive effects on the economy. They're not catastrophically bad. It seems to be correlated with a decline in inequality. So my broad opinion is conditional on the minimum wage not having extremely large effects, but seeming to impact inequality fairly dramatically. It doesn't have to be costless. It just has to be one of the least costly ways to mitigate inequality. And I actually think it's a contender in that realm. To put it another way, the cost per unit of minimum wage seems to be relatively low, but the change in inequality per unit of minimum wage seems to be fairly high. And so as a consequence, you may think that is a way forward. Another one is union density, unions and inequality. So I didn't talk about this, but there's reason you can have the same time series graph. I don't think time series graph are horribly convincing. You can have the same time series graph and say, oh, it used to be the top 10% earned a lot, and then unions rose and they fell, and then unions started falling. Unions fell for a couple decades, but then they fell a lot, and then the top 10% share rose. I mean, I think there's a problem right here. Part of the reason I didn't present it is then why wasn't there a rise here? But there was no commensurate rise here. Even the time series don't match up completely. But either way, people might say unions are to blame. I think it's, as a political economy question, it's not clear if it's viable in the U.S. Now, the history of labor unions is not slow and steady march. It is wildfires breaking out across the country. It's a sudden unionization. So, it's not clear if viable in the United States is even right. But it is true that unions seem to have a massive negative effect on R&D and investment. There are plenty of papers about it. They seem to slow job growth. They seem to lower profits. They seem to slow macroeconomic recovery. I don't even talk about the biggest paper in this, which is Lee and DiNardo, which kind of show that for every unionized worker, it seems that the value of a firm decreases by about $6,000 in their data set. Now, some of that may be a transfer to the workers. Maybe we don't care about that. Maybe that's even good. But I think there's significant reason to think a lot of that is and their appendix shows some declines in investment, if memory serves, that there's a decline in real opportunities in the United States, in real investment, real capital formation in the United States. So if I was going to compare unions, which I think it's harder to even make the case that they're changing inequality, but they seem to, where minimum wage has very little effect per unit of benefit of decreased inequality. Not only is the mapping between unions and inequality unclear, the cost is much more clear and higher. So I think in that sense, minimum wage seems to trump unions in that sort of a framework. This is my opinion, but it's certainly my read of the evidence, and I do like to read the evidence. One fun fact I have to insert here is the fact that inheritances actually reduce inequality. So what can we do about it? You might say, "What are you talking about, Guy? This is some some sort of I don't know, fact-free thing. Here's why. If you think of two people, I am earning $1 and you are earning $10. And when my parents die, they pass on to me $1. When your parents die, they pass on to you $3. Well, my wealth has just doubled, or the value of my inheritance as a fraction of my wealth or my income is dramatically high. But for the rich, for most of the wealthier people, empirically, I actually think this is in Sweden, but or can't remember where this data is from. But the point here is that the rich actually inherit less as a fraction of their income / wealth as than the poor do. And it's not that they inherit less than the poor do, it's just as a percent of their wealth. So that's just a fun little fact. Now, of course, if you eliminated inheritances entirely, that might increase inequality, but it depends on what you did with the annihilated money. If you then took it all and gave it to the poor, then you would reduce inequality far more. But it's worth knowing that that for at least the countries that I've seen data for, and I cannot remember, this is Sweden, there's another country out there, or I can find the reference if you want, that there's reason thinking the institution of inheritance actually reduces proportional inequality, even if it raises absolute inequality, which is not how we typically measure it. It's a fun little fact. What about the elasticity of taxable income? So could we tax our way out of this? This kind of response to the say-as, Piketty, and I've already forgotten the other co-author. Stephanie Stanteva. Is not a co-author to forget. So, well, you could ask, even for those guys, how much does taxable income fall when tax rates rise? And so this is going to be a little in the weeds, but if the tax rate rises by 1 percentage point from 25% to 26%, we typically think, and these are, a number from Gruber and Sayez. These are two. Gruber was Obama's economic advisor. Sayez is not a guy who finds very high elasticities because he's politically biased to find high elasticities. I don't want to say just the opposite because that seems like it's casting aspersions on him, but just the opposite in a not casting aspersions way. But even they would say in a survey article that survey of the evidence article, the taxable income would fall by about 0.75%. So that's significant. That's saying it might be close to 5%. The idea here is that for every dollar that for every dollar that the government raises, the private economy loses $1.75. $1.75. Excuse me. So does that make sense? That there's a lot of deadweight loss to this thing. Again, for every dollar the government gets, not only does private economy lose that dollar, that's fine, the government gets it, so that's zero sum, but then private economy then makes 75 cents less, and so they're out $1.75, the government got $1. This isn't a Laffer curve argument because the government's still making money, but the economy has lost a significant amount. The deadweight loss of taxation, deadweight cost of taxation seems to be quite significant. And so while it's true that taxation is an obvious way to change inequality, even these guys, who again are not politically motivated to find a small effect of taxation, even these guys find fairly large implied losses to the economy for these sorts of tax increases. Now you might say, wait, but Sayez says this, if you're familiar, Sayez says this paper, he says it's a top 70% marginal tax rate. The way he gets that is not by saying that there's no loss to the economy. The way he gets that is by essentially saying the rich have zero marginal utility from their income. So it doesn't matter that the economy loses $100 for every $1 the government gets, because $100 are being lost by the top marginal tax rate guys, and they don't have any value for the money that they're losing. So it's not coming from no cost. It's coming from we don't care about the guys who are losing, which is just a different idea. And maybe that's the defense of this, is to say, yeah, but we don't care about those guys. That's fine. But it's worth knowing that GDP it goes down by $1.75 for every $1. This is costly in a way that, say, the minimum wage doesn't seem nearly as costly. Minimum wage does not seem nearly as costly. Sorry if I sometimes slur my words. Another concern about taxation is that high earners vote with their feet. So I already showed you this slide. I think I stole it completely from this lecture when I was talking about immigration and the mobility of people. But there's reason to think that people vote with their feet. It's not enough to, it contributes to a Laffer curve, but it's not enough to make the Laffer curve, 20%. It just means that you are, for every dollar you earn, you're losing money for your economy. Okay. So that's just to say, taxation, obvious solution, but it's also a costly one. And the question is, are there less costly, less disruptive ways of doing things? And from my perspective, the minimum wage, which I'm not like, I'm not a minimum wage guy in terms of it's not my research, but it was at one point. But does not seem nearly as costly as some of these other things. But are there other costless ways to do this? I think we've understudied a significant fraction of this, but can we reform intellectual property law so that people aren't rent seeking? What about, we actually eliminated tax deductibility of performance-based executive pay in the 2017 tax code, which is basically before firms could get for free, or I should say firms can get free paying their executives performance-based pay. So basically, I give you a bunch of stock options if the stock price goes up a lot, right? That used to be tax deductible. It is no longer. And so that's the sort of thing I'm thinking about when I think about, can we change GAAP accounting rules so firms have to recognize that payments to CEOs are payments? Here, why are we making some forms of payments to CEOs tax deductible? I cannot think of an economic justification. I'd be glad if you could, for tax deductibility of performance-based CEO pay. And in fact, that was eliminated in 2017. But that's just good economics, and it potentially has this side effect of reducing inequality. It would seem that if you're concerned about CEO pay and finance in general, but CEO pay, corporate governance reform seems to be a desirable thing. Is there a way to make shareholders, small shareholders, better able to govern CEO pay? Is this just some weird board of directors to CEO plot, where you scratch my back, I scratch yours, I raise your compensation, you raise mine, and all the shareholders, don't really care because it's only in the low millions of dollars, and we're only stealing 1%, 2%, 3% of the company from them. It's not, it's nothing compared to their returns. Well, maybe we can fix that. Maybe we can allow shareholders to object. If that's possible, that's something my opinion is worth pursuing. Again, these are more opinionated. Okay, so from there, we're going to start thinking about, should we care about this? So this is my most controversial part of this lecture. Stay tuned.